Okay, colleagues, greetings, good morning to some of you, and we're gonna continue our reading of the wonderful Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy articles. So the article today is about Jean-Jacques Rousseau by Christopher Bertram. Mm, I'm pretty sure there's an important book by Bertram on Rousseau, but that's a separate point. So this is, to me, this looks like a very, very useful article. I've taken a look in the past at it, and it seems to be very concentrated. It's like all the major topics that we need to discuss. And again, I remind you that basically our two most important points of interest are the second discourse, so Rousseau's criticism but of the accounts of state of nature of Hobbes and Locke, but also his own account of the state of nature, very importantly. And then the second book of interest to us is the social contract, du contrat social, right? And we're going to mostly deal in this video with the discourse, the second discourse, and then in the second video we'll talk about the social contract. Anyway, let's go. So, article published in 2017, fairly recent. Well, revised. So, Jean-Jacques Rousseau remains an important figure in the history of philosophy, both because of his contribution to political philosophy and moral psychology, and because of his influence on later thinkers. Yes. In many ways, we've talked about Marx, but Marx doesn't talk about communism. If we want to know about communism, we have to read Rousseau, right? Rousseau's own view of philosophy and philosophers in general is firmly negative. Marx actually to some extent as well, with a conception of ideology, right? Traditional intellectuals, as Gramsci would say. So Rousseau's view of philosophy is firmly negative, seeing philosophers as post hoc rationalizers of self-interest and apologists for various forms of tyranny, yes, and playing the role of in alienation of the modern individual from humanity's natural impulse to compassion. Again, these ideas, broadly speaking, should and do remind me, for example, of Marx again. Marx's concept of ideology, first and foremost. You see, in many ways, again, we are talking about these six philosophers. They inform each other, right? And especially, I think, Marx, Rousseau, Mill, and Hegel have to be read together. And I would say, when people ask me what will communism look like, I tell them we should read Rousseau, Hegel, and Mill. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. The concern that dominates Rousseau's work is to find out a way of preserving human freedom in a world where human beings are increasingly dependent. Again, another important reference to Marx, dependent on each other for the satisfaction of their needs. And this dependency makes us slaves, right? But could it also make us free? Again, I hope you see parallels with Marx. This concern has two dimensions, material and psychological, of which the latter has greater importance. Well, for Marx, it's probably the other way around, but it's okay. So we have two aspects, material and psychological, two dimensions. Two aspects of dependence, two aspects of unfreedom, maybe. Yeah, the concern of a way of preserving human freedom. Oh yeah, by the way. Colleagues, please, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is not Jean-Jacques Stalin. The key concept in Rousseau is freedom. Freedom. The concern that dominates Rousseau's work is to find a way to preserve freedom. And there's a material and a psychological aspect to this question. In the modern world, human beings come to derive their very sense of self from the opinion of others. Okay, again, this is Rousseau as the founder of sociology or social theory. Right? Humans, in their very the inner workings of their self, depend on others. Depend on what society teaches us. Compare this to Freudian ideas of superego. Also, I should say, yeah. So again, Rousseau's concern is to establish human freedom, right? Now, you can say at the end of the day, his picture doesn't work, but it sounds to me a little bit disingenuous to think that Rousseau is a genuine proponent of tyranny. This just sounds wrong. Okay? You can say maybe his solutions don't work, but of course, in addition to his solutions, there's also his diagnosis. So you don't have to agree with Rousseau. I'm not saying you should agree with Rousseau, right? But you should understand what is the problem that he's facing. What is the problem that he's trying to solve? Finding a way of preserving freedom. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So. So in modern world, human beings come to derive their very sense of self from the opinions of others, a fact which Rousseau sees as corrosive of freedom and destructive of individual authenticity. In his mature work, Rousseau principally explores two routes in achieving and protecting freedom. The first is a political one, aimed at constructing political institutions that allow the coexistence of free and equal citizens in a community where they themselves are sovereign. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's look at this phrase. Constructing, so this is the true social contract, constructing the political institutions that allow for coexistence of free and equal citizens in a community where they themselves are sovereign. I would say, again, first and foremost, free. And then, secondly, also in important respects, equal, in other respects, potentially unequal. Elective aristocracy, right? And so this is the task of the true social contract, right? Not the false and mendacious social contract, which is a swindle, which Rousseau talks about in the second discourse. The second is a project for child development and education that fosters autonomy and avoids development of the most destructive forms of self-interest. So when we say self-interest, I would say, again, narrow. Self-interest narrowly understood. Because I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, Rousseau would say that your true self-interest, or let's say in this quasi-Aristotelian and proto-Marxist fashion, right, human beings can only be properly happy in a well-functioning society. So it is better to be a citizen, for you individually. This is my reading of Rousseau. Anyway, however, though Rousseau believes the coexistence of human beings in relations of equality and freedom is possible, he is consistently and overwhelmingly pessimistic, yes, that humanity will escape from dystopia of alienation, oppression, and unfreedom. And again, reminded, right, of our discussion of Marx last time. Was Marx also getting pessimistic towards the end of his life? In addition to his contribution to philosophy, Rousseau was active as a composer and a musical theorist, pioneer of modern autobiography, novelist, botanist, appreciation of the wonders of nature, importance of feeling and emotion, anticipator of romantic movement. Yes, to a very large extent, the interests and concerns that Marx's philosophical work also inform these other activities. Rousseau's contribution to non-philosophical fields may illuminate his contributions to philosophy. Okay, we don't have time to focus on this. Okay, so this was the introduction. Again, the question of Rousseau always is the question of freedom. Okay. So, the second, I'm skipping the first paragraph. The first section has to do with Rousseau's biography. I'm skipping that. So the second section talks about conjectural history and moral psychology. Rousseau repeatedly claims that a single idea is at the center of his worldview, namely, human beings are good by nature, but are rendered corrupt by society. Or as David Boucher puts it, man is born innocent, society corrupts man, but paradoxically only society can redeem man. Human, I would say in general, right? Unfortunately, despite the alleged centrality of this claim, it is difficult to give it a clear and plausible interpretation. Well, not sure I agree with Bertram here, but I think we can give it a clear and plausible interpretation. But let's read on. So, an obvious problem is present from the start. Since society, the alleged agent of corruption, is composed entirely of naturally good human beings, how can evil get a foothold? Oh yeah. This is an important question. Well, I'll spoil the answer. The answer is that human beings by nature are not good. Human beings are by nature innocent. At least this is my attempt at an answer. Yeah. It is also difficult to see what natural goodness might be. Yes. It is also difficult to see what natural goodness might be. And again, let me add so it's not really good, but innocent. innocent in the sense of like morally neutral. Like, you know, like rocks. I mean, tigers or lions attacking zebras. Is that good? Is that bad? I would say, you know, it's just natural. That's the way it is. In various places, Rousseau clearly states that morality is not a natural feature of human life. Yes, I would say again, this is in support of my idea of innocent, morally neutral, not good. Oops. Morality is not a natural feature of human life. So we need education, we need institutions, right? So in whatever sense it is that human beings are good by nature, it is not the moral sense that the casual reader would ordinarily assume. In order, therefore, to address this puzzling central claim, it is best to look at first at the details of Rousseau's moral psychology, especially as developed in the Discourse on the Origin of Equality and Emile. So notice, morality is not a natural feature of human life. So this is an idea that we see in Hobbes, in Rousseau, but also, very importantly, in Mill, but also in Hegel, and yes, in Marx. This idea that society is not natural in an important sense. Society is artificial. Like it is uniquely a product of societies are not automatically good, not natural, not automatically good. You need maybe some like history. You need mechanisms. You need particular mechanisms that will make society good. So Mill, for example, is going to talk about these. You know, usually what we're talking about is history. The role of history, the idea that you cannot jump stages in history, maybe at least to some extent. Well, different philosophers are going to understand this to a different degree, or focus on this to a different extent. Anyway, let's continue. Rousseau attributes to all creatures an instinctual drive towards self-preservation. Yes, this is important. Human beings, therefore, have such a drive, which he terms amour de soi, self-love. Amour de soi directs us first to attend to our most basic biological needs, things like food, shelter, warmth. Since for Rousseau, humans, like other creatures, are part of the design of a benevolent creator, maybe with a question mark. Well, no. Rousseau definitely talks this way, but Rousseau's theology and Rousseau's theodicy are a problem. Problem in the sense of they're not necessarily straightforward. What Rousseau means by God is not necessarily what everybody else means by God. Yeah. So human beings are individually, but there's certainly a certain, how should I put this? Fitness in nature, in a sense that, you know, natural human beings are well attuned to their environment. They're individually well equipped with the means to satisfy their natural needs. Well equipped human beings are skillful by nature. Alongside this basic drive for self-preservation, Rousseau posits the passion which he terms pitié, compassion. So we have amour de soi, pitié. Pitié directs us to attend to and relieve the suffering of others. So, David Hume talks about this as limited compassion. Limited compassion. So we have limited sociability and limited compassion for Rousseau. Well, we can. Hume's phrase is maybe limited benevolence. I forget. Doesn't matter. So we try to relieve the suffering of others where we can do so without the danger to our self-preservation. So this is limited compassion. In some of his writings, such as the Second Discourse, pitié is an original drive that sits alongside amour de soi, whereas in others, such as Emile and Essays on the Origins of Language, it is a development, amour de soi. Well, is this important? Not too important, but an interesting notion. In the Discourse on the Origins of Inequality, Rousseau imagines a multi-stage evolution of humanity from the most primitive condition to something like a more modern, complex society. Evolution. Rousseau denies that this is is a reconstruction of history as it actually was. So a lot of people are very quick to attack Rousseau for his quote-unquote unrealistic portrayal of the state of nature. But Rousseau says this is a conjectural history. And Friedrich Neuhauser, I wonder if this is the Neuhauser. We have a reading about Hegel from Neuhauser. Is this the same Neuhauser? Maybe it's the same Neuhauser. Has argued that evolutionary story is merely a philosophical device designed to separate the natural and the artificial elements of our psychology. Merely a psychological device to separate the natural and artificial elements of our psychology. I like this. So like a thought experiment. At each step of this imagined evolution, human beings change their material and psychological relations to one another and correspondingly their reception of themselves, or what Rousseau calls the sentiment of their own existence. The sentiment of their own existence. According to this narrative, humans live basically solitary lives in the original state of nature, in the original state of the human race, since they do not need one another to provide for their material needs. So a little bit like squirrels maybe in a forest. The human race barely subsists in this condition. Chance meetings between proto-humans are occasional for copulation and reproduction. Childcare is minimal and brief in duration. So, if humans are naturally good at this stage of human evolution, their goodness is merely a negative and amounts to the absence of evil. So again, we have this limited sociability plus limited compassion. In this story, human beings are distinguished from the other creatures with which they share the primeval world only by two characteristics: freedom and perfectibility. This complicated and interesting word, perfectibility. Freedom in this context is simply the ability not to be governed solely by appetite. Perfectibility is the capacity to learn and thereby to find new and better means to satisfy needs. Yeah, I like Ellen Ryan's spin on perfectibility. Ellen Ryan calls this unfinishedness. This is Ellen Ryan. And more like an ability, sort of this notion that human beings are not completely pre-programmed by instinct, and therefore we can change. And mostly, of course, we change for the worse. For Rousseau, it's a potential to change for the better, but mostly really for the worse. Okay, together these characteristics give human the potential to achieve self-consciousness, rationality, and morality, which don't exist originally in the state of nature. Self-consciousness, rationality, and morality all emerge. Nevertheless, it will turn out that such characteristics are more likely to condemn them to a social world of deception, dissimulation, dependence, oppression, and domination. Again, it's an ability to change, but mostly for the worse. As human population grows, in many ways, I feel that this is the primary mode. This is the primary vehicle, not the vehicle, the primary driving force behind change. Population growth. And why does population grow? Well, Rousseau just says human beings are just so good at, finding food and all the rest of it. So it's like we are skillful, therefore population grows. So this is the primary drive for change. When I say primary, I mean first impetus for change. Let's put it that way. So population grows. Simple but unstable forms of cooperation evolve around activities like hunting. We have this stag hunt game, which goes back to Rousseau. According to Rousseau, the central transitional moment in human history occurs at a stage of society marked by small settled communities. At this point, a change, or rather a split, takes place in the natural drive humans have to care for themselves. Competition among humans to attract sexual partners leads them to consider their own attractiveness to others and how that attractiveness compares to that of potential rivals. In Emile, where Rousseau is concerned with psychological development of an individual in modern society, he also associates the genesis of amour-propre with sexual competition. So we had self-preservation, amour de soi, pitié, right? And now we have, in addition to this, we have amour-propre. So this is, let's say, 1, or maybe A. Amour de soi. B, we have pitié. And now C, we have amour-propre. So these are the key components, key ingredients of human psychological makeup or something. Yeah. So in Emile, Rousseau explicitly associates the genesis of amour-propre with sexual competition and the moment puberty, where the male adolescent starts to think of himself as a sexual being with rivals for the favors of girls and women. Rousseau's term for this new type of self-interested drive, concerned with comparative success or failure as a social being, is amour-propre. Again, love of self, often rendered as pride or vanity in English. Amour-propre, like amour de soi, literally means love of self, right? But these are two very different loves of self. So don't confuse. Amour-propre makes a central interest of each human being the need to be recognized. Recognition. Say hi to Hegel. Hegel is going to make a lot of recognition later on by others as having value to be treated with respect. The presentation of amour-propre in the second discourse, and especially in his note 15 to that work, often suggests that Rousseau sees it as wholly negative, passion, and the source of all evil. But, not exactly, because we will see there are positive elements of amour-propre, especially in the social contract, source of honor, patriotism. So interpretations of amour-propre centered on the second discourse often focus on the fact that the need for recognition always has a comparative aspect, so that individuals are not content merely that others acknowledge their value, but also seek to be esteemed as superior to them. This aspect of our nature then creates conflict, because you see, I want to be superior, but only one can be superior. We cannot all be equally superior at the same time, right? It's a drive towards this false and wrong kind of inequality. Some inequalities, like inequality of merit, inequality of pay, merit, of desert, of patriotism, of virtue. These are good inequalities. At least striving to be the best. That's good. But again, this drive to be superior necessarily leads to conflict. People try to exact this recognition from others or react with anger and resentment when it is denied to them. More recent readings of the second discourse, and especially of Emile, have indicated that a more nuanced view is possible. Okay, maybe more nuanced view. Let's check it out. According to these interpretations, amour-propre is both the cause of humanity's fall as well as the promise of its redemption. Yes. So, man is born innocent, society corrupts man, but paradoxically, only society can redeem him. So the positive role of amour-propre. So it develops human rational capacities and their sense of themselves as social creatures, among others. Although Rousseau held that the overwhelming tendency socially and historically for amour-propre takes on toxic and self-defeating, inflamed forms, so inflamed amour-propre, he also held that there are, at least in principle, ways of organizing social life. In principle, there are ways of organizing social life and individual education that allow amour-propre to take on a benign character. This project of containing and harnessing amour-propre finds expression in both the social contract and Emile. In some works, such as the second discourse, Rousseau presents amour-propre as a passion that is quite distinct from amour de soi. In others, including Emile, he presents, so maybe it's distinct, but in Emile he says, no, actually, amour-propre is a form that amour de soi takes in social environment. Okay, make what you will of this. But I am alerting your attention to this distinction. The latter is consistent with his view in Emile that all the passions are outgrowths of development of amour de soi. Yeah, so this would include PTA and amour-propre. Although amour-propre has its origins in sexual competition and comparison with small societies, within small societies, it does not achieve full toxicity until it is combined with growth in material dependence among human beings, material interdependence. So growth of material interdependence exacerbates the problems of amour-propre, the problematic nature of the evils, let's say the evils of amour-propre. In the Discourse on Inequality, Rousseau traces the growth of agriculture. You see, agriculture and metallurgy are not the first problems, right? Agriculture and metallurgy comes on the scene only later. So agriculture and metallurgy as the first establishment of private property, together with the emergence of inequality between those who own land and those who do not. In an unequal society, human beings who need both the social good of recognition and such material goods as food, warmth, etc., become enmeshed in social relations that are inimical both to their freedom and to their sense of self-worth. So we're unfree and unhappy. Subordinates need superiors in order to have access to means of life. Superiors need subordinates to work for them and also to give them the recognition that they crave. In such a structure, there is a clear incentive for people to misinterpret their true beliefs and desires in order to attain their ends. Thus, even those who receive the apparent love and adulation of their inferiors cannot thereby find satisfaction for their amour-propre. Again, we're going to see, sounds very much like master and slave dialectic from Hegel. This trope of misinterpretation and frustration receives its clearest treatment in Rousseau's account of the figure of a European minister towards the end of the Discourse on Inequality, a figure whose need to flatter others in order to secure his own wants lead to his alienation from his own self. Need to flatter others in order to secure his own want leads to his alienation from his own self. Yeah, I feel again, colleagues, the best commentator on Rousseau is Rousseau himself. There's no substitution for reading the second discourse, but we've made some progress. But let's continue. Amour de soi, amour-propre, and pitié are not the full complement of passions in Rousseau's thinking. Once people have achieved consciousness of themselves as social beings, morality also becomes possible, and this relies on the further faculty of conscience. The fullest account of Rousseau's conceptions of morality are found in the Lettres morales and in the sections of the Confessions of Savoyard Vicar and part of Emile. In the most primitive forms of human existence, before the emergence of amour-propre, pitié balances the restrains self-interest. To that extent, akin to a moral sentiment such as Humean sympathy, again, say hi to David Hume, but as something that is merely instinctual, it lacks for Rousseau a genuine moral quality. So we are not really moral in the state of nature. We are innocent, neutral, morally neutral, not moral, not yet moral. We truly become moral, well, the full flourishing of human morality is possible only in the true social contract. Genuine morality, on the other hand, consists in the application of reason to human affairs and conduct. So this in the true social contract, right? This is what Rousseau talks about. Freedom and moral freedom is the obedience to the law that one has prescribed to oneself. So, moral freedom, obedience to self-prescribed law. This requires the mental faculty that is the source of genuinely moral motivation, namely conscience. Conscience impels us to the love of justice and morality in a quasi-aesthetic manner. As the appreciation of justice and the desire to act to further it, conscience is based on rational appreciation of the well-orderedness of a benign God's plan. Yeah, again, we see this again. Rousseau has very complicated views of theodicy. Cambridge Introduction by Gurevich, the Cambridge edition of Rousseau's work, and incidentally, introduction written by Gurevich actually talks about this. However, in a world dominated by inflamed amour-propre, the normal pattern is not for immorality of reason to supplement or supplant our natural proto-moral sympathies. Instead, the usual course of events in civil society is for reason and sympathy to be displaced, while humans' enhanced capacity for reasoning is put at the service not of morality but of impulse to dominate, oppress, and exploit. A theme both of the second discourse and of the letter to D'Alembert is the way in which human beings can deceive themselves about their own moral qualities. So, for example, theater audiences derive enjoyment from eliciting of the natural compassion by a tragic scene on the stage. Then, convinced of their natural goodness, they are freed to act viciously outside the theater. Interesting, interesting. Philosophy, too, can serve as a resource for self-deception. Say hi to Marx. It can give people reasons to ignore the promptings of pitié, or, as in Rousseau's essay Principles of the Right of War, it can underpin legal codes, such as the law of war and peace, that the powerful may use to license the oppressive violence whilst deadening the natural feelings of compassion. Okay. Well, we've made some progress. We're going to take a break now. The next section is going to be on political philosophy. And this is going to be maybe a more interesting, maybe a more important section for us. We'll talk about the constitutions of government of Poland. We'll talk about the lawgiver, civil religion. We'll talk about censorship. So, let's take a break. Stay safe. Take care. Hope this was fun. And I'll see you around. We're going to take a break now. The next section is going to be on political philosophy, and this is going to be maybe a more interesting, maybe a more important section for us. We'll talk about the constitutions of government of Poland. We'll talk about the lawgiver, civil religion. We'll talk about censorship. So, let's take a break. Stay safe.